Hello and welcome to Rules of the Game, where three lawyers demystify the rules nonprofits have to follow when they're advocating on the issues they care about. I'm Tim Mooney.
I'm Leslie Barnes.
And I'm Quinn Tu. And we're attorneys at Alliance for Justice's Boulder Advocacy Program. Every day we take calls and emails from nonprofits on how to safely and boldly take stances on women's health, climate change, civil rights, and much more.
On this show, we'll talk about some of the greatest hits, questions we get every day. We try to keep the jargon to a minimum, but if you're new to nonprofit advocacy work, check out our starter video at boulderadvocacy.org/start.
On this episode, we'll talk about how a C3 can safely praise or criticize elected officials who are also candidates for this year's 2020 election in order to further the organization's mission. You may recall in our prior episode with Candace Montgomery confronting Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. In this episode, we're looking at things from a slightly different perspective. Instead of directly engaging an elected official who was a year away from being on the ballot, we're going to look at social media criticism of a candidate who's also on this fall November ballot. And Leslie will lead us off with our first example.
That's right. We've got Ali Noorani, who is the president and CEO of the National Immigration Forum. They're a C3 advocacy organization that promotes the value of immigrants and immigration. And in this clip, Ali is responding to the president's executive order banning certain types of visas.
Late yesterday, President Trump decided to extend and expand his April 22nd proclamation by banning certain persons who arrive in the U.S. with L, J, H-1B, or H-2B visas. Now look, I understand that Americans are terrified. They're scared for their personal or their economic well-being. And many are worried that their children will struggle for years, if not the decades to come. I totally get it. But this policy does little, if anything, to serve the interests of the American worker or their family. The Trump administration is using a global pandemic to advance an anti-immigrant agenda. In fact, since COVID-19 first set its teeth on the United States way back in late January, early February, the administration has moved forward with 48 changes to the immigration system, and most of which have no definitive end date. So at the end of the day, these actions, I think, do only one thing. They sow divisions within the American society.
So when you listen to that clip, or if you're watching on video, if you're watching that clip, you'll notice one really big thing that stands out here, and that is that the criticism that Mr. Noorani is giving to the administration is focused very much on the actions of President Trump and the administration and not directed at him as an individual. And one of the things that you may have noticed is that there are several references within that to the, quote, administration. And I think that that only goes to underscore the fact that this is a policy criticism, not just of the president's actions, but also of the broader administration of these things by people that are under him as well. So it extends to the agencies too. If you remember back to our episode on the facts and circumstances analysis, this is how the IRS looks at these things. One of the factors is whether or not the communication suggests that in its criticism that it's going to be used in some way to suggest that the person is unqualified for office. So it gets personal and it extends to whether or not they should be a candidate at all. And here that's just not the case at all. It really focuses in much more on the policy matters, the criticism of the policy matters, and goes from there. So I think that this is really clearly, at least for me on that point of the analysis, a green light.
I'd like to build on to Tim's analysis and focus on a couple of different factors in addition to what he's outlined. So one is the history of advocacy for immigrants that the National Immigration Forum has done. Obviously, this is part of their mission is to advocate for the rights of immigrants, and this is the reason they exist. So their history of advocacy is pretty solid. And as you can see or hear in the clip, Mr. Noorani shared with us that there have been 48 changes that President Trump has made to immigrants' rights since January. This point actually leads me to a second factor that I want to focus on, and that's timing of the communication. Whether or not this timing is driven by an election or if there were some other non-election related factor that caused the timing of this communication. So this was released in early summer of 2020, and we are months out from an election, right? We are hearing a response from Mr. Noorani to an action that President Trump has taken by signing an executive order. So this communication is being released to respond to that, not to influence the outcome of any particular election. And you notice what's missing in Mr. Noorani's communication is any reference to an election or the fact that Mr. Trump is going to be on the ballot in November. So for these reasons, I also agree it gets a green light.
I love what Tim and Quinn said, just looking back, as Tim said, Allie's response, it's not a personal attack. It's not being used as a proxy to comment or try to influence the outcome of the election. You don't hear any reference to the election or to voters, and talking about the administration, as Tim said. And then Quinn reminded us there was an external factor outside of the organization's control that's driving their response and timing. And we look at the track record. So for a C3 organization, this is exactly why they exist. C3 organizations exist either to serve a charitable purpose, an educational purpose, a scientific or religious purpose, and they are allowed to educate the public and to advocate on behalf of the communities that they serve. And yeah, I'd love to see more of this. I think we've got another example.
Our second example comes from Marissa Ordonia, who's a senior associate attorney at Earth Justice's regional office in Seattle. In this clip, Marissa speaks about a case against the Trump administration.
Hi, I'm Marissa Ordonia. I'm an attorney at Earth Justice, and I'm working to stop the Trump administration from continuing to allow a toxic pesticide to be used in your food. Trump's EPA ignored its own scientists and illegally left this pesticide on the market. So we sued him, and we won. But EPA is continuing to delay while this poison remains on our food. We're back in court to make sure that they follow the law and that people are protected from this pesticide. My case is just one of 115 open legal matters that we have challenging this administration. The attacks with this administration are intense, but we're not backing down.
Oh my goodness. 115 cases against the administration. If that's not commitment to environmental justice, I don't know what is, especially for those of us who are familiar with how much work it takes to litigate and how long it takes to litigate. So 115 cases definitely illustrates the organization's history to advocacy and commitment to advocacy, which is one of the factors we talk about all the time in this context of whether or not a C3 is being partisan, right? So Marissa's clip really shows that Earth Justice is releasing this communication in order to show the public or educate the public, as Leslie likes to say, on what the federal administration is doing and how those policies are impacting our lives on a daily basis. So this gets a very solid green light from me.
I love it, Quinn. So what jumped out at you was the 115 cases, open cases against the administration. And then what jumped out at me was that Marissa said, the administration has ignored their own scientists and left pesticide on the shelves. So yeah, she's explaining why they're litigating this case and why the Trump administration's actions are harmful. It's a discussion of policy, and we don't see any of the bad factors that we talked about on the last episode. We don't see comments about candidates or voters. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, I'm with both of you. This is a really solid green light. And I think that what you said, Quinn, is really, really important. Track record is such an important factor. We talked about that in the prior episodes as well. And Leslie, what you said about the explanation of the reasoning being very much based in policy matters and in the litigation itself. And I think that that's the piece that is really compelling to me as well. We talk about this a lot in the analysis of these things, that when you've got something that is non-electoral in nature, that is the trigger for your communication or your action, the IRS is going to look at that pretty favorably if you're a 501c3. So, you look at all of these factors together, just like the IRS does, throw them in a sack, shake them all around, take a look in, green light all the way.
I love it. I hope that folks listening will continue their advocacy. And if you'd like to check out some of our resources that explain the rules that we went into a little bit more in depth, they can check out one of our fact sheets called Praising and Criticizing Incumbents, or we have a longer guide on our website called Rules of the Game.
That's a great name for a podcast.
We hope this episode helps make you a bolder advocate. Join us next time for more ways to maximize your advocacy and make positive change in your community.
We're much more than this podcast. If you've got questions, you can call Boulder Advocacy at 866-NP-LOBBY or email us at advocacy@afj.org. You might even get one of us. If you found the show helpful, please rate us on whatever app you're listening so others can find us.
For more resources mentioned on this show, plus the show notes for this podcast, visit boulderadvocacy.org. On behalf of Leslie and Tim, this is Quinn. Thanks for joining.